Jan Burton.
For Twitter?
Yeah, I think so.
Sorry, we should start without listening.
Yeah, we're gonna.
Yeah, we're gonna start. It's on her mic.
Is she walking in the building?
Yeah.
Oh, never mind. That's fine. You know, I'll go.
I'll wait 2 minutes.
Okay.
What a full room. Holy smokes. I think it's at Jan Burton CO.
At Jan Burton CO.
Yeah.
I love it. Look at how full our room is.
Tweet failed to send because the Wi-Fi is
Yeah,
slow.
Jan Burton CO.
Yeah, the
Icky.
Wi-Fi is slow right now.
I'll try getting another.
You asked my question.
Oh, good. I'm sure because of the topic, people are curious. They have their own ideas of what they want to know. Here's
I should just leave it to just let it go with my 2 bars. Okay, she is here. I wonder.
Nope. I'm ready to go. Whatever you need. Right here. Saddle up. We got you.
How are you? It's good to see you again. I see you all the time. You just don't see me back.
Such a classic statement.
Right? Things going well up there?
Yes. Always so busy, you know.
Yeah.
It's like hard to keep up with the latest developments on all fronts.
Right. There's always so much.
I don't even know where to go to my drafts.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Hi. Welcome. Thanks for braving the cold weather. I might point out it's white. It's a little bit of white out, which is appropriate for our title, which is Welcome to Women in White, the changing face of politics. And I dug the one white thing that I had in my closet today out, so I'm actually in white. My name is Jan Burton, and I'll be the moderator for this session. And I have met all 4 of these lovely ladies, and it's going to be a fantastic session, I think. I served in the Boulder City Council for 2 years, from 2015 to 2017. So I had my own calling, I guess. But it's not about me today. It's about these 4 women, and it's about your conversation and your questions, which we've already gotten one. So I'm really excited about this. I would like to welcome you to the Changing Face of Politics, UMC 235, session 2402. And this is being live streamed, so if you guys want to stand up and smile to the camera, you'll be on candid camera. Okay, let me introduce our guests. Immediately to my left is Leslie Harrod, who is currently serving in the Colorado House, District 8, and was voted in 2016. And she's sponsored a number of really great legislative actions, and you can read about her if you Google her. She did graduate from CU.
Go bus.
Yeah. and she lives in Denver. To her left is Ana Cabrera. I'm not going to read her bio because it was in the guide, and I think you can read plenty of accolades about Ana. Ana's living in New York now. And to her left is our own Angelique Espinoza, which I'm sure many of us know. Angelique served us on the city council for a number of years, has gone on to be a leader in a number of things in this community with the Chamber of Commerce. She's currently the acting director of the Museum of Boulder and is quite well known from a political and also leading campaigns, and just a great woman thought leader in this community. And then finally is Teresa Younger, who, again, her bio is in on the app as well as in the guide. So she's had a stellar career in policy and a number of foundations, and it's really a joy to welcome you here to Boulder.
Thank you.
Okay. I asked them each their favorite color, and none of them said white, and none of them are wearing white, but
Thank you.
I'm gonna kick this off by asking Anna to start with a couple of opening comments. Her favorite colors are blue or red, and I pointed out that those are both political colors. And then she said, well, it's kind of moved to purple or pink for her 3-year-old daughter. So, Anna, would you kick this off by making a couple comments?
Sure.
Thank
So
you.
for those who maybe aren't familiar because you don't watch the news on the weekends, I'm Ana Cabrera. I'm an anchor with CNN, and you pretty much can't get rid of me on Saturdays and Sunday afternoons. If you turn on the television on CNN, my shows are from 3 to 6 p.m. Eastern and 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern on Saturday, and then from 5 to 9 p.m. Eastern on Sunday, and then I do some additional anchoring and reporting during the week, as well as doing events like this. So I'm very pleased to be here. Thank you for such a great turnout in this room, because I know how difficult it can be to travel in this weather, although you're probably all used to Colorado weather. I was born and raised in Denver, so it's fun to come home, and I feel right at home with the flurries out there today. A few thoughts, because I'm a journalist. I can't speak to what it's like to be a woman in office, because I have never served in office, but we do cover a lot of politics, as you can imagine, in the work that we do. And I was on the ground, around the last election. I was a correspondent for CNN at that time, based here in Denver. And I was out there in the field with the Women's March, and I was out there interviewing women who were offended by the president's remarks that were, caught on tape with the Access Hollywood video and recording that came out prior to the election. And that seemed to really spark a fire under a lot of women, saying we need to get back involved in politics and just and take back positions of power in general. And I've talked to a lot of women over the years, including this last election cycle, who really found that as a motivator, what happened in the last election. And so in the midterms, we saw a record number of women run for office, and we saw a record number of women take office. And I wanted to compare a little bit, because you hear of about the year of the women in Washington back in 1992, following the Anita Hill hearings, and the number of women who ran for office and were elected during that time. And I'm happy to say, when it comes to gender equality, we've come a long ways even since then. Back in 1992, there were 24 new members that were women elected to office. This past year, there were 36 new members elected to Congress. And so now we're here in a position in which there are 102 women who were elected to the U.S. House in 2018, 14 women to the U.S. Senate, and 3 women who are now serving as governor all around the country. And that's huge when you think about, if you're comparing just to 1992, which seemed to be this great boost of women in office. In 1992, by comparison, there were only 54 women serving in Congress. And today, there's 127 women serving in Congress. So that does show progress in society. But there's still a long way to go. If you look at just by percentage, there are 25% of senators are women, and less than a quarter of members of the House of Representatives are women. And you look at the current White House administration, there are only 3 women serving in the president's cabinet right now. If you look broader, bigger picture beyond politics, less than 5% of Fortune 500 CEOs are women. And women today only make 80 cents to every dollar that a man in the same position make. So there's room to grow. Studies show firms with more women in the C-suite benefit. They're more profitable. So it's good for the bottom line. It's good for society. And I think some places are starting to get that. I can speak to my industry, the media, and you look at ABC, NBC, CBS now. All three of those major networks have morning shows that are executively produced by women now. That's a new thing that just happened within the last few months. More women in coaching positions. You look at the NCAA March Madness tournament, and when you look at the Final Four women's teams that competed this year, 3 of the 4 head coaches of those women's teams were women as well, which is different than what we've seen in years past. And more women are going to college than men. 56% of college students are women. So there's progress, there's momentum. And I just want to share, in closing, a little story. My son, who is 7, and I had this conversation a while back. I was painting. It was one of my weekends. We're hanging out in our house, and I'm just doing some work. I had CNN on in the background, trying to multitask and stay on top of the news. And so my kids hear a lot of the news as well. And he was asking questions about how people become president, and just kind of out of the blue, he goes, "Well, Mom, I think you should be president." And I said, "Oh, well, why do you think I should be president?" He said, "Because you're smart." And so I think that gives me a lot of hope to think that, our next generation are not necessarily seeing the same gender stereotypes that have existed until now. And I think that there, again, is room to grow when it comes to women in positions of power, not even positions of power, but just in representation in different aspects of our society. And we're on our way.
Thank you, Anna. Well, we've already had one question, and the question is, why the title Women in White? And I asked myself the same question. I kind of knew, but didn't really before the session, so I looked it up. And the color white is associated with the suffragette movement, and early advocates of women's voting rights wore white as a symbol of purity, often alongside purple for dignity and green for hope. The suffragettes also used white to reassure onlookers that their protests were non-aggressive. So that's why the title. Next, we're going to hear from Angelique Espinoza, whose favorite color is wine red.
Not because of the wine, just because it's that deep red color. First of all, I want to thank the CWA organizers for continuing this amazing event year after year. I want to thank you all for coming. I want to thank my fellow, or I guess sororal panelists, and Jan for moderating today. It takes a lot of people to make something like this happen, and I'm very grateful for all the folks who have done that work. I would like to tell you a little bit about my story. We got a lot of facts, which was fantastic. But I'd like to tell you a little bit about my story and how I got involved in politics and what that looked like for me, and a little bit about intersectionality. So I was one of those Generation X, head in the sand, didn't feel like anything I did would make a difference, so I didn't bother and just focused on my life, You know the type. And then the story about the torture at Abu Ghraib came out. And that was the last straw. That was the moment where I said, whether or not I can make a difference, I have to do something for my own peace of mind. I can't do nothing anymore. And that was in 2004 during the Kerry campaign. I don't even remember who he was running against. And I worked on the Kerry campaign, and I landed in a kind of a niche with the Latino Initiative, and we focused on turning out more people in precincts with high numbers of Latino voters. So we had a plan for bilingual teams of folks to go into those neighborhoods. And, the reality is most Latinx who vote are English speakers. Nevertheless, just having Spanish language available and having literature in Spanish really makes it feel more welcoming for people when you come to their door. It's recognizing who they are. And we were successful in increasing voter turnout in those precincts, but we were not successful in actually winning that election. So I stuck my head back in the sand for a little bit. And then I was asked to be the equity officer for the Boulder Democratic Party. And I jumped on board, and I started looking around and realizing that there were no elected officials of color in Boulder County, and there were very few on boards and commissions. And that seemed to me like actually a much bigger problem than representation for women, because in Boulder County, we tend to have pretty good representation for women. Since at least the 60s, we've been, the Women's Democratic group has been very much the movers and shakers and deciders about who gets elected to office. Because, of course, in Boulder, there are so many Democrats that a Republican doesn't even have a chance to win. So the entire election happens during the primary process, which means that it is absolutely controlled by and governed by the Democratic Party leadership, including the folks who are already elected to office and the people who are in leadership in the sort of official, the chair and so on. So, as the equity officer, I wanted to make things more welcoming for marginalized communities of all kinds, and suggested that instead of inviting them to come to our meetings and then being surprised that they didn't feel comfortable, that we go to their meetings and their fundraisers and their stuff and sort of, give before we ask. And I thought that was pretty successful. I also started researching how to bring people from a non-traditional place into the pipeline. And in many places, that's women, bringing women into the pipeline. This is a bit of a stereotype, but it's one that I've heard in several women's trainings. A guy wakes up, looks in the mirror, and says, I'd make a really good senator. And a woman will generally not even apply for a job that she does not feel 100% qualified for. Nobody's 100% qualified to be in political positions. So you have to ask a woman, statistically, 7 times to run before she will seriously consider it.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
So ask women to run. Are you running?
No, I'm covering the races.
That's once. Seriously, ask smart women you know to consider running for office. Ask them again, ask them again, ask them again. Offer to be on their kitchen cabinet. Offer to help them raise money. Offer to help them understand what's necessary. That's the way we get more women in office, and it starts at the local level. What I found was that as I started to develop this sort of curriculum and support system for women, people kept asking, well, why don't you run? And I finally got tired of saying no, so I ran for city council. And I won, and I sat on city council for 2 years. And the most important thing that I did the entire time I was on council was have my name, Espinosa, in front of my seat on the council. Because although there had been many councils that were majority women, I was the second Latinx to ever serve on Boulder City Council in 150 years. But I found that it wasn't feasible to stay on because our city council really doesn't get paid, and the stipend was not doable having a small child at home and also working. So I just didn't work for 2 years, which was okay because I was able to be supported within my family. But didn't feel like I could take a hit on my resume for any longer than 2 years. So I left council and I continued to work in policy for the Boulder Chamber of Commerce, which is not the National Chamber of Commerce. It's our local independent Chamber of Commerce for about 5 years. And then somebody asked me to run for the State House. And I got in. And then the people who make the decisions about who gets to win in Boulder decided they didn't like me because I was too much for affordable housing and not enough for preserving neighborhood character. And so they ran somebody against me who gathered up all of the endorsements, who was able to fundraise very well. I was able to fundraise very well also. But that person then spent an additional $75,000 out of her own pocket to beat me by 212 votes. I would have been the first Latinx to serve in the House from Boulder, ever. And I came pretty close. But that was a very devastating loss for me. And it was something that showed me that there is no point in a person of color who isn't from the inside group running for any office in Boulder, because there's a group of folks who kind of control things, and they're like, well, yes, we want more diversity, but we don't want you to have that seat if one of our friends wants that seat, and one of our friends always wants that seat, and all of our friends are rich and white. So, just telling it like it is.
Thank you.
I'm very pleased to have run several local issue campaigns successfully, and I found that running not as the candidate, but just running a successful issue campaign was pretty rewarding, but also very hard on the nervous system. Being a campaign manager is very hard on the nervous system, and I decided that I didn't want to do that anymore. So, and coincidentally, somebody reached out to me with this position at the Museum of Boulder, which I'm very, very happy there at the moment. But I know a lot about how to win campaigns and how to get women to run and win campaigns and how to support women to run and win campaigns, as long as they're not women of color in Boulder.
Thank you, Angelique. We are not yet to the question asking yet, but I just want to review this so you can start thinking about your questions. We do have a number of questions already coming in. I think most of you know that at Conference on World Affairs we give preference to the students. Are the students in the back of the room standing? Are you students?
Nope.
Because if you will please write on your question that you're a student, and we'll give preference to students' questions. So we will use both the Conference on World Affairs app, if you happen to have that on your phone, and we'll use write-ins. So there are two producers, one here and one back there. So if you have a question you'd like to submit, please raise your hand or submit it on the app. And I'm using this computer to go through the questions. We'll try to get to as many as possible. Okay, thank you, Angelique. And now I'd like to go to Teresa Younger, whose favorite color, I think you're wearing it.
I've put it on.
Yes, fuchsia.
Next to pearls, it's fuchsia. First off, I want to thank Angelique for the honesty that she just presented with, because and I want to thank CWA. Some of you have seen me a few times, and I really am enjoying these conversations because of the brilliance of the panelists that you sit next to. It makes you better, it helps you think, it helps you and challenges you, and I really appreciate that. So there's a couple of things you should know that will not show up in my bio. First off, I served for 5 years on the board of the Women's Campaign School at Yale, which was a 5-day training program to prepare women to run for congressional office. And we have seen a number of those women win and run in their run for political office. So I've asked many, many women to run for office in many, many roles. I do not want to hear us talk about the year of the woman or the year of women. I'm sick of us limiting our conversations to 1 month and 1 year. Let's start talking about them forever. And, I'm really excited about what is happening in Congress and on the state levels. And we got some great numbers, but let me tell you these numbers. So 20% of Congress is made up of women. 7.1% are women of color. This midterm election, of the 7,383 state-level elected offices, 25.5% were women. 6.2% were women of color. There is a real conversation to be had. And in fact, I laughed because when I first read the title of today's program, I did not read Women in White, which I knew exactly what that was. I actually watched, the State of the Union and saw this powerful representation that I did not see as a level of purity but of protest, and really appreciated and enjoyed that. But when I read the title of today, I saw white women. Yeah. Interesting, right? Your mind plays with you. What you see, what you hear. The work of the Ms. Foundation for Women is about centering a conversation around women, but more importantly and more recently, it's about centering a conversation around women and girls of color. And that means lifting up and telling a story and having a conversation that's really critical. And one of the things that I want to say is that what we are seeing is not just more women in elected office. Yay, amazing, fantastic. What we are seeing is a change in what leadership should and could look like that recognizes the diversity that women bring to the table. That we do not lead monolithic lives, that no matter the color of our skins, we do not all think the same way, and our experiences shape how we have conversation. And we are seeing it, and it is being challenged, and it is exactly what we need to do. So when we have this conversation, I'm really excited, not just about what's happening in Washington, D.C., which I think is amazing, and I get excited about seeing those women do their amazing work. More importantly, it is what is happening on the state and local level throughout this country. We will be the experiments of what democracy looks like, and we've got to have more women on the school boards, on finance boards, on city councils, on county councils, in state offices across the country. Colorado is an exception to the rule. You are not the norm. But you are an example of what can happen when you start pushing on all the barriers and when you start speaking truths. Speaking truths about how comfortable or uncomfortable you're willing to be, given the models of leadership that we have been challenged with and grown up with. Because we say we want women as leaders if they. And the reality is, in order to have women in leadership, we need to say, unlike they, because we need to have a change in the policies that are going on. A patriarchal society was not designed for women, nor was it designed for women of color, and as we move into leadership roles, we will take that down and redefine what leadership is going to look like in this country. Amen. I'm really excited about this conversation.
Thank you, Teresa. I noticed a number of people who are standing up. There are some seats over here on this side if you'd like to take a seat. I don't want to pressure you, but feel free to wander on back here and wind around to that side. And if you have a seat next to you, if you'd raise your hand, it looks like there are quite a few seats spaced around. So feel free to take a seat. Okay. Now we're leaving the last group of comments to you. Leslie, who has experience also in running for office and in being part of the state legislature. Leslie's favorite color is purple, even though she's not wearing it today, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you. Hey, so I am State Representative Leslie Herod, and I'm proud to have that title. I'm proud to be the first African American LGBT person to hold elected office here in Colorado. It's a pretty cool thing, and I gotta say I got my start right here in Boulder, right here at the UMC, which is actually quite funny. So it's amazing to be back here, and to all the students who are here, don't ever stand in the back, come sit in the front, and you can leave when you want to. I know you're busy. But we have to remember that this campus is for the young people, and being on Legislative Council of the UCSU, it was called at the time, and the Cultural Events Board, I made sure that we had events for students on this campus, and that we continued in the rich tradition of rigorous academic conversation. And so I'm very proud to be here today. I got my start, as I mentioned, right here on campus because I came onto this campus as someone who, my mom was in the military. I was born in Germany, but I lived all around, and traditionally spent a lot of time on military bases, which are quite diverse. I initially wanted to go to Berkeley out of Colorado Springs, which is where my mom was last stationed, but she said it would turn me gay, so she wouldn't let me go. Oops. Little did she know about Boulder. But for other reasons, including financial, and because it was the best flagship institution in this beautiful state of Colorado, I found my way at the University of Colorado on the University of Colorado campus. In my first few days, first day I went to class, I had the auditorium-style classroom, and to my surprise, it looked very much like this room, which was all white. And I was the only African American person in my classroom, and I was surprised because I swore there was an African American face in the brochures that I looked at. And as I reviewed them, I noticed that it was the same many times. But so that was surprising. They didn't tell me when I came onto this campus that we were the least diverse university, public university behind Brigham Young. Right. So I thought I came here to be a cheerleader. I cheered. I loved being a cheerleader. I loved doing that through my schooling. It was kind of one of the things that when I came to new schools and that kind of brought me into a community that I didn't know. So it's kind of my way of getting to know new people. So I thought I was coming here to cheer, but after the first one class, then second class that looked exactly the same, I didn't know if I actually belonged on this campus and if it was for me. So it was funny because I was walking right out in front of the UMC and someone tapped me on my shoulder, African American male, and he said, "I know what you're looking for. Don't worry. We meet at the UMC at noon. You'll find us at the tables." And it was true. It was all, and you knew what I was looking for. I was looking for black people, and there were black people, and we all hung out downstairs. But it wasn't just black. It was brown, it was first generation, it was women, it was LGBT students, and we all came together at lunch to hang out, which I thought was pretty amazing. But then I went back to my classroom and it was the same. Maybe there were one or two of us in a class, but not many. So then I saw a sign for student government elections, and I thought, you know what? I'm not going to be here, and I'm not going to stay, and none of my friends are, if we don't feel like we belong here. So it's time for us to run for office. In that year, we decided to run. I decided to gather a coalition. We called ourselves the Progressive Ticket, and we ran all people from all of those different tables, which really represent different walks of life, for every single seat. And in that year, we took over every single seat in the student union. Because when you run in coalition, you win, right? Especially when you're a person of color, it is imperative that you run in coalition. And so we did this, and we took over the student government. And while I was here, we stayed in leadership in the student government the entire time. I will say that I didn't know that we were the largest student government in the nation, and I didn't know that by the time I became president of Legislative Council, I'd be running a $36 million budget around the age of 20. And so it was a very eye-opening experience, but it really helped me to find my footing in policymaking and understand why it was so important for communities to have direct representation in office. So while I was here, the University of Colorado campus and system became one of the first state organizations to have domestic partner benefits, which at the time was absurd for people. They thought it was just going to bring down the world if queer people actually got to like have partners that had benefits. We did that, and as one of the largest employers of the state, really had a lot of folks follow suit because of how not complicated it actually was. So we did a lot of work like that, but most importantly, we built friendships and bonds that last forever. So when I graduated, decided to continue the work and start a nonprofit called New Era Colorado. Some of you guys may have heard of it. With two of my good friends, you may know of these names as well, Jonah Goose, who also served in student government, now congressman. And I think he's chairing the committee in Congress as we speak. And Steve Finberg, your actual majority leader in the Senate. We all were in student government together, different branches, and decided to take that beyond and continue to work for the people of Colorado. Since then, as you can tell, we've all chosen to continue to run for office. We have done that together, and sometimes we win and sometimes we lose. But we know how to have direct impact on changing the climate and the culture right here in this state and now in this country. And so, I think it's really imperative that we support people of color and women when we run. I don't always identify with the women in white because sometimes that movement has been known to be exclusionary towards women of color and Black people in particular. And so I want us to think about, when we talk about electoral reform, to ensure that when we are talking about diversity, we don't just say diversity, but we speak what we mean, which is Black and brown people, people who are differently abled. We have no one serving in the Colorado General Assembly who is in a wheelchair. And quite frankly, I don't even think we're capable of doing it right now, which is very problematic. And so we have to change that because direct representation is so important. So now being in the General Assembly, I serve as the chair of the Finance Committee. I serve as the vice chair of the Judiciary Committees. I'm the only person with two chairwomanships. And thank you. And I do chair the Black Caucus. And so in my leadership, I think it's important that once we get to these positions, that we don't shy away from the conversations, which a lot of folks want us to do. They want us to just take the positions and be okay with it, right? Like, you got it, so stop complaining, you're good to go. It's not really complaining, right? It's advocating for what our communities need. So I have a track record of passing legislation. I passed over 25 pieces of legislation to the governor's desk for signature. I look forward to passing a lot more reforms and working in partnership with my colleagues to do so. I will state that right here in Boulder, you do have, and I always have to acknowledge the Boulder delegation. So you have an amazing delegation in Boulder. You're represented by the majority leader, Steve Finberg, in the Senate, as well as some other good friends who are working to ensure that we do have diverse representation in office. Representative Edie Hooten, Senator Mike Foote, Representative Jonathan Singer, and the Speaker of the House, Casey Becker, who has made it a personal mission of hers to ensure that not only do the people of color in the General Assembly have leadership positions, but also that we're cultivating the freshman class, which is the largest Latina-led freshman class that Colorado has ever seen, and putting them in leadership positions as well. And so it's a real honor to serve the people of Colorado. It's a real honor to serve the people of House District 8, and I look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, we are getting a lot of questions from students, which is fantastic. I think this is the most I've ever had. And some of them are very similar in nature, so I might pool a few of them just to get their thoughts going. Here's the first one from a student. How can we change society to make sure women of color have a chance in upcoming elections? Mm-hmm. And there are also questions about just what can we do to support women in politics?
Sure, I guess I can start with that. So it is true that women of color, people of color, and queer people tend to run in places that are primary elections, and when I'm talking about the state level and beyond, when you have a partisan race. Okay. So what that means is that we don't have the institutional support, because typically when you have a Democratic Party or Republican Party, they don't endorse in the primaries. And so then it's kind of a, everyone go out and do your own thing. And so I faced that when I ran. And while I was actually quite qualified for the position, because I had done so much work, I should say that I was our governor's senior policy advisor. I'm the only person who has over 10 years of Capitol experience before walking in as a state legislator. I was Governor Ritter's senior policy advisor and President Obama's deputy political director for Colorado. And so it's really hard to not have that institutional support. But we don't win typically, and they don't put us to run in places where you have a competitive general, because people are afraid that black people won't win if they're put up against a white person in a general election. And that's real. That's what people say. So when I ran my race, I ran against a white man who was well funded, and that was a very competitive race. And it was hard to get people to support in a primary, because they said, well, we'll just wait for the election. We don't want to pick between our friends at this level. And we've heard those conversations before, and they're real. So since I've gotten in office, but I still won. But since I've gotten in office, I've worked with the women of color and our allies, our strong allies, to start a leadership fund. And in my leadership fund, and now our leadership fund, we support women of color, LGBT people, and allies, and people of color and allies when they run for office at the primary level when they need the help the most. And so we are typically the first endorser. We are typically the kind of stamp of approval that this person is viable. But then we also make them viable. So we go out and we knock doors, we get them into trainings, and we ensure that we win. And I got to say that I have a 90% success rate in the candidates that have come through my leadership fund, and would love to have more support and more of those funds that step out and say we will support in primaries. And our focus is increasing the electorate representation.
Super, thank you so much.
I was just going to add, I think, if you look at it more broadly, you can do your part by just supporting your sisters, your friends, your moms, your daughters, and encouraging them to run. To your point earlier about just being asked, being encouraged, having somebody say, I believe in you. You would be really good at this. Mm-hmm. I can speak just from my own personal experience of being just a woman in what was a male-dominated industry for a long time, too. I mean, it takes years to kind of break down some of those barriers, clearly. And I think when it comes to political office, the good news is you do see this trend of women saying, I can do this, and stepping up into those roles, not always winning those elections or those seats, but it is starting to happen more and more. And you look at just this last election, 47% of the women who ran, who were Democrats, won their seats for national office, for federal office. And, a little bit less so when it comes to Republicans. 24 was, I think, around 24% of Republican women who ran won their seats. But more broadly, if you encourage women to run, that's going to help get people going. And then supporting them. I think it's hard as oftentimes as a woman to run, because sometimes we have other obligations to our family, right? You may have children, and traditionally women are the primary caretakers of those children. And I think it's time to kind of throw out those old stereotypes and those traditional roles. And I think women are as guilty as men of sometimes boxing ourselves in to certain positions. And I can say proudly, I have a husband who has a career, but is also extremely, extremely supportive of my career, and does a lot of the domestic duties and childcare responsibilities, so that I can pursue my own ambitions and dreams and hopefully make a difference in society in a way that's meaningful to me. So I know being very supportive, encouraging, and saying I believe in you makes a big difference. And I think, a lot of people will say that about their peers. I also think women just being supportive of women in the workplace is another way that we can help empower each other.
Mm-hmm. That's absolutely right.
Great.
So I would say a couple of things. One is early money and early endorsements. as Leslie was saying, a lot of people are reluctant to make endorsements in the early primary, and that is almost always going to be to the detriment of the woman against a man or of a woman of color against a white woman. So have the courage to offer an early endorsement. Pressure people who are in important positions to have the courage to make an early endorsement, and get early money in the door. Build that treasury as fast as you can, because there's nothing that makes you a viable candidate as much as a big fat first report of your finances. Also, Leslie mentioned training. Absolutely. Go to trainings, offer to help someone go to a training. Sometimes there are scholarships. Emerge has a fantastic training program here in Colorado, but there are women's political trainings in lots of places. If you're a very organized person, offer to be their campaign manager. Yeah. If you are very good at accounting, offer to be their treasurer. And if you're neither of those things, just offer to be on their kitchen cabinet and meet weekly with a small group of people who can help them delegate and get feedback and be able to, not be on their own. It's a team effort. Getting someone elected is definitely a team effort, because the candidate's job has to be being the candidate, period. And everything else should be done by someone on their team.
Thank you.
So the last thing I would throw in is campaign finance reform. We've got to move. I'll be political on this one. We've got to. Every single person that just spoke talked to money and politics. And so we want more women. We want more people of color and women of color to run. We need campaign finance reform that actually that adjusts the required monies needed to actually run, because it is expensive, it is time consuming, and you need to have those things in place. And I could say a whole bunch on a whole bunch of stuff, but reassess what money and politics is doing. Reassess who has the time to run and raise money. When you are dialing for dollars instead of listening to your constituents, it means you are not able to do what needs to happen, or else require all small dollar contributions. But you can speak more to that, Leslie. You know it well.
Well, I just want to add, that's extremely important. And it wouldn't necessarily have helped in my situation as much, or what Angelique spoke about, because you also have to think about the public financing of campaigns is really, I think, where we need to go, because I ran against a self-funder as well. And so while that person didn't have to raise as much money as me because they were able to pay their own way into office, I am not able to do that. And now, being in office means that I have given up the opportunity for me to make a lot of money to then run for the next office, right? And so I am not that person, and a lot of people of color aren't. And so, really look at not just the contribution limits, because quite frankly, I could probably outraise my opponents at any time. I'm very confident, but women of color tend to are used to working 3 times as hard or 5 times as hard to get half as far, right? And so I'm used to that work, but I will not be able to write my own $100,000 check probably ever. And so really look at that too, about how are we dealing with the self-financing of campaigns.
Thank you. I'm taking good notes up here because I met with a young black woman just 2 days ago who is very much trying to decide if she should run for Boulder City Council. And now I know the things that I can do to help support her, because I'm very much in favor of her running. I think she's very sharp. Okay, great. I'm going to go to a little bit more general question, because we just got some great discussion about supporting women and people of color for politics, but we've had a couple of questions a little bit more in general. The first question comes from a student, which is, how can white women support women of color? Very general question. And then another question, which is, how can I, as a white educator, be the most effective advocate for my Latino and black students?
How cool is it that it's all women of color on this panel, too?
Yeah.
That's
Right?
pretty great, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Who wants to take it?
I'll dive in. You know, as white women, start voting the best interest of communities. Because I hate to break it to you, it was white women who, and not necessarily in this community, but possibly, who actually voted for the man that's sitting in the White House right now. And that's a reality. 97% of black women and 93% of Latinx women voted for the other person that was running. And so, you know, I get really frustrated at this question, what can we as white women do? How about have a conversation with your sister and your cousin, get really uncomfortable, talk about your values. If you really want to see leadership change, then go for it. Put the time, the energy, and the money behind what you believe, and don't just wish it to happen. We are building and standing on the shoulders of a legacy of racism, sexism, and every other ism that you can imagine. And guess what? Look it in the face and decide you're going to do something about it. And don't rest on the laurels of women of color to fix it for you. And educators, question every ounce of history you're teaching. It was written by somebody else, and it is not actually factual.
Yeah. So I'm going to say something that I've heard a friend of mine say many times. Guilt is useless. Guilt is completely useless. It is of no help to the person who feels guilty, and it is of less help to the person they feel guilty about. Responsibility is valuable. So it's not about feeling bad about being white. It's about taking responsibility for the privileges that you have gained by being, just because of how you were born. It's not your fault you were born white, you just were. And as a result of that, there are things that you don't have to worry about or think about, or perspectives that you can never really experience. And I'm happy for you for that. So take responsibility, don't feel guilty, and listen. Just listen. Because that's how you're going to know what you can do for someone. There's a fantastic event that happens every year. It's called the White Privilege Conference. And it's really good. There's all kinds of seminars that will help you dig deeper into understanding how that privilege works for some people and against other people. And of course, we're all the sum of who we are. So, you know, some people are white men, some people are rich white men, some people are gay white men, some people are gay Latino men, it goes on and on. There's many aspects of privilege. And so it's not just like a pyramid. It's some kind of weird Venn diagram. But the White Privilege Conference is a great opportunity to really dig into these things with other white people, because some of us are really tired of trying to teach it.
Anna.
Let me offer a couple of thoughts, because we have these conversations in my newsroom often. Who are we looking to for ideas? Who are we surrounding ourselves with? And I think just diversity in general is so important in all aspects of our industry, of our society in general. And oftentimes our own views are shaped by our own personal experiences about and what we personally have endured, or who we are surrounding ourselves by or with. And some of that we can't necessarily control, right? we were raised in a certain place, we have a certain family, we went to a certain school with a certain amount of diversity around us. So when we are looking to our teams at CNN, we're focusing on consciously building teams that have diversity so that we don't have so many blind spots, because in order to really serve our communities and our viewers and our countries or nations the best is in order to look like and reflect those communities that we're trying to reach. And so, you know, I think about not just diversity of race or ethnicity, but diversity of thought, diversity of gender, diversity of age, diversity of sexuality, diversity of religion. I mean, all of those things are so important in order to really be as well-rounded as possible, to make sure that we're covering the issues that matter to our communities, to make sure that we're also pursuing stories or asking the right questions when we're covering certain issues, because we don't necessarily know how certain things are impacting different individuals who have different life experiences. And so I think, you know, when you think about it more broadly, be conscious in terms of who you're calling on, if you're a teacher, in terms of asking for ideas in your classrooms. And I think if you're mindful, that's one way to start breaking down what may be some racial barriers. I mean, I hate to even talk about it in a categorical way, because it almost becomes white and then other. We all offer some level of diversity, and I think it's appreciating that diversity and embracing it, because it makes all of us better.
Yeah, I agree. So I'll just quickly add a couple of things that specifically white people can do when it comes to lifting up voices of color. So I say step up and speak out when you see discrimination, microaggressions occurring. Do that, right? Because when I was even on this campus, it happened all the time, but it continues to happen in the state legislature, and it doesn't always happen from the other side of the aisle. Right? So step up and speak out. That's so, so important. I was on a call, and it was a leadership call, and I just remember something that only impacted me, right? Being the thing that they were going to push aside. And someone stepped up, a white man, and said, well, I want to know how Leslie's going to feel about this, because it impacts her the most, and the issues that she cares about the most. Had nothing to do with his agenda at all, or anything he was working on. But that made such a difference, to know that he was my ally in that moment, right? Because I was pretty taken aback. And these things happen all the time. So step up. And then step back, right? So allow women of color to lead. Even if it's something that you feel like you are better qualified or have fought longer for this issue, allow women of color to take the lead and support them. Don't just step back and wait for it to fail or fall apart. But step back and say, this really matters to me, and I know that you're gonna handle this in a way that is even better than I could even think of, and I want to support you 100%. That is probably the hardest thing to do, right? And so think about times when you can really, really step back and allow someone else to lead when it matters the most to you, the most. The other thing is, and I don't have this exact quote, but I'm sure my fellow panelist does, but when you're thinking about where to put your philanthropic dollar, so how are you giving back in society right now? A lot of well-meaning white philanthropists, and I used to be in foundation land, give to issues that they think Black people should care about, but not the issues that we actually care about. So talk to people of color, look to see what we're doing, what spaces we're active in, and support those movement spaces. That's where your philanthropic money should go, not to something that you think will make you, or something that makes you feel better about your life.
That's great, thank you. Okay, I'm going to target these questions now so I can get a few more questions asked. I am looking through these, prioritizing by students first, and then I'm also looking at the ones on the. So, okay. Angelique, if you can answer this one, what do you think is the biggest impact that the growing generation or the younger generation could make to help create equality and more strength for women?
Well, my son is 17. He'll be 18 in June. He's going off to college, and he's not quite as liberal as I would like him to be. But he is thoughtful. You know, he's thoughtful and skeptical, and he thinks things through, and he has reasons for what he thinks. And his concern is that the two political sides have become so, especially sort of the extreme ends, have become so fraught with each other that there is no more space for people who disagree to actually talk to each other. And this includes on issues around gender. So I would like to think that this younger generation doesn't have as much problem with gender, but I don't think it's true. I think they're much better on not caring about your gender or gender identity. I think they're much better about not caring about your race. But I don't think the young men, a lot of young men really get what things young women still struggle with that they don't have to think about.
Nice. Okay, Teresa, if you can answer this one. Again, from a student. How do we specifically encourage young women to run or get involved in politics, especially when there is still the mentality of my individual voice doesn't matter, so why should I vote?
It's a great question. I really appreciate whomever asked it. I think one of the things that we have to remember is that we are all a part of what this is about. And you have to figure out that the right and the privilege that we have in this country is around voting. We, at this point, all have that right. And we have to be able to institute it. We have to be able to continue to use our voice in the multiple ways that you can create voice these days. So yes, you can go to a march, and you can tweet about it, and you can blog about it, and you can hold a consciousness circle about it, and there are lots of ways for voice to be heard and amplified. And organizing each other is a wonderful way to do it. Like Leslie, it was college that got me into really understanding what the political realm looked like, how to shift and move dollars to create your priorities, and what policy needed to look like. This is an opportunity, and if you are on a college campus, take every advantage in every way, shape, and form to have your voice heard and to vote. It's like, I will vote for dog catcher. I will go all the way back to where I pay my taxes, regardless of where I am traveling, to vote for dog catcher. There will not be an election that will not have my vote on the books. Understand that that is the greatest privilege and right that we have in this country. People died and fought for this. And we have to participate in it. And you have to find that elected official on any level, literally any level, that you can look up to. Do not think they are perfect, but offer your opinion. I don't know one elected official who does not want to hear from the next generation, because I do believe that most elected officials are doing it not for power, but because they want to make the world a better place. And most of those amazing legislators that I get to meet with and that I interact with want to make the world a better place for tomorrow. And so that means they need you there, we need you there to be able to work with them and understand what happens so that when you do get elected and you do run and you do what you're going to do, you actually are not gun shy about what's going on. Because people get into elected office and don't have a clue what it's going to take. So don't just get people elected, support them once they are elected. And if you're a young voice and you're on campus, use every opportunity to know how you want to play the game. And I say all the time, know the rules. Know them better than anybody, because once you know the rules, you can change them. If you stand on the outside and complain about the rules but don't know them, then you can't actually change them.
That's right.
I want to thank everyone for questions. We have gotten probably 30 questions, and obviously we're not going to get to them all, and I apologize for those of you who asked a question that we will not get to respond to, but I really appreciate the fact that so many people submitted questions that were very similar, and students have submitted some great questions too. So we've got about 6 minutes remaining. I'm going to ask Anna if you think it is likely that a woman will become a president soon, and then the next question is it likely that a woman of color will become president soon?
I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball, but I do know there are 6 women who are running for the Democratic nomination, and that is a record, right? And I'm trying to think, at least a couple of them. I want to make sure I get this right. See, it's Elizabeth Warren, it's Kamala Harris, it is Tulsi Gabbard, Amy Klobuchar, Kirsten Gillibrand. Who am I missing? Marianne Williamson, yes. So, if you want to see a woman, and if you would like to see a woman of color elected president, vote, campaign, knock on doors, because that's what's going to make the difference. Who knows? But I think, it's a possibility.
Super. I'm going to give you a chance, each of you a chance to just give a summarizing comment. We have 5 minutes left, so if each of you could take 1 minute and just any final thoughts that you'd like to share, I would appreciate that.
Sure, and I found the citation that I mentioned earlier. So of all grants awarded to girls of color, only 20% went to issues that girls of color identified as critical. Of all of the grants given, only 20% actually went to things that we care about, is what that's saying. And that's from the grant makers for girls of color. And so a national organization that did that study. In closing, I'll just say that it is critical that we have women of color in office. It's critical. Oftentimes, I'm the only voice at the table. I'm proud not to be that anymore. But if we're not there, we don't bring up the issues that really matter in our communities, but I think also change the face of Colorado. So things that I'm working on include things like getting rid of our cash bail system. And it has not been a conversation in the Capitol, and I got to tell you, now it's gotten out of the House and the Senate with unanimous support. So, it's really important that we're in these positions because we push the conversations. We push it from a personal perspective, I think, which is really important. But also we're able to build coalitions in places where people weren't able to before. A lot of women of color have lived in rural communities. My grandma, right, and the places I spent my summer was on a hog farm in Mississippi. And so while they talk about the urban-rural divide a lot in Colorado, I actually can understand very well what goes on in rural Colorado because either I'm there all the time or I grew up in the summers with my grandparents. Same, and that's across the board in the Black Caucus, and it's across the board in the Latino Caucus, which I think is really important. So we don't necessarily have to always talk in partisan speak. We can work across the aisle in ways that doesn't always get done, and I think it's a really good thing for Colorado and for this country. But when it comes to young women particularly, running for office is not an easy thing. We need support. So when I talked about things like New Era Colorado, which is really, I think, has been critical in my success, the reason why we were successful is because all 3 of us were invested in at a very young age. Putting the $200 to get chalk to run on this campus was hard for me to do. And organizations came in and helped. Getting the money to go to a national conference or even stay at a hotel, even if I was bunking up 4 to a room, was hard to do. But I was invested in, and you have to invest in young people. So when we talk about, I know this woman of color who wants to run, she's probably not going to tell you that she can't afford to come to your house that night, especially if you live far and she has to get gas, right? So start to think about things that you haven't had to think about before and support people in their runs in that way. And then support us when we get there, because we are typically in safer seats. We're not invested in once we get into office. But if we want to continue to rise up through leadership, we have to do the same things that everyone else has done, which is raise the funds and get other people elected. So help us in those positions as well once we get there. And so, looking around the room, it's a white room. It always is. It has been forever, right? We know that. that, go and start really making a conscious effort to bring more people of color into the circle that you exist in. And then go and ask if it is appropriate and okay to be in circles where there are people who don't look like you. And ask what you can do to be in service of people of color. In service of people of color, which is not easy to do. But please do that. And if you need help or ideas, please feel free to reach out. I am available on social media. So if your questions didn't get asked, feel free to reach out to me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and I'll try to get back to you very quickly. Thank you.
Anna.
Okay. I'll go quick because I know we're running out of time. But I think, one of the things that I've always appreciated and have valued about the experiences that I've had growing up and now in the position that I have, I recognize that it's a privilege and a huge responsibility to have the kind of platform that we have. And so we're really, again, mindful about the type of issues we cover and the voices that we bring on our shows so that we are more representative of a diverse community. And I think back to how fortunate I have been as a person of color. My dad's family is from Mexican ancestry, and I learned a lot of hard work and how to be resilient through their upbringing. But I think, I also think about the people who supported me, and not everybody has the same kind of support system. And particularly people of color oftentimes have more adversity than others. And so I think, telling, again, goes back to just setting expectations, high expectations for those people of color in your life and for those women who are in your life, and just letting them know that you believe in them and encouraging them, because sometimes you need a little bit of a kick to take action, and it's a risk, so it takes courage. And my mom's in this room and she's sitting back here, but I think back to one of my internships that I did that I feel like made a huge difference in my career journey, and I didn't really want to apply for that internship because I didn't think I had time. I didn't know if if it was the right time to apply. And I remember her saying, well, why don't you just give them a call and see if you can come down and introduce yourself, while I was home over winter break looking for a summer internship. And I was going to school in Washington State, and I was looking for an internship here in Colorado when I'd be back. And I'm so grateful that it was my mom who said, just do it. And it was like, okay, I can do it. And I just needed that little bit of a shove to take action. And I had an awesome internship that allowed me to make a resume tape that really kind of led to my first job in the business. And so I shared that experience because you never know what little sign of support and action that you offer to somebody else that can make the difference.
Great. Angelique?
I'm going to offer just a few of my best secrets for winning campaigns. So you can write these down. First of all, you can get more money, but you can't make more time. So budget your time even more carefully than you budget your money, which means you got to plan your work and work your plan. Plan your work and work your plan. If it's not in your plan, don't do it. Work your plan. There are 3 audiences you're always talking to. A 3-second audience, that's the person who takes your mailer from the mailbox to the recycle. They're going to see the biggest words on the outside of that mailing. So make sure they matter, that you're there, that's your top level message. Your 30-second person is going to see that, and then also the headings. So make sure that those headings are going to hit your 30-second audience as they stand there with it for 30 seconds before they put in the recycling. And then you have a 3-minute audience. That's the person who takes your mailer, puts it in a manila folder with all the other mailers, and when their ballot comes, they spread it all out on the table, and they actually read every word on your mailer, and maybe actually go to your website and look there too.
Hey, Angelique. I hate to interrupt, but we're getting booted out of the room because the next panel is ready to come in. Can you submit the rest of those on Twitter?
Yes.
It would be fantastic if you would do that. And Teresa, I'm really sorry that you can't make a closing comment. I really appreciate all of you. I think this has been a fantastic panel. And thank you so much for coming.